Hi, looks like we are live. Yes, but let me do one operation. Yes, I'm not seeing you there, so better for me to do so at this time. Yes, for sure. And yes, okay, operation done, and now we are set. Good evening. Thank you so much for stopping by one more time. If you are a repeater, or if you are watching for the first time, I will share some thoughts, some ideas, some words uh, in a purpose driven perspective, point of view, about some of the issues that I find more relevant and significant to consider at this time. So, in times like we are living, today we are going to talk about all of you. All of you is the expression that I will develop in this live, and the intention is for us to access different perspectives, dimensions, ideas about our own way of considering our own identity. Yes, and what can we do to be ever more near the very best we can be, not only in our life or in our work, in our relationships, in our parenting with our other family members, whatever it may be. The call is the same: being the very best expression we can be of ourselves. And that's, in my definition, the purpose driven life. Living our own life purpose really amounts to finding or searching, if you haven't find it already, searching, finding, expressing the very best of our truthful creative expression. So, no more do's. All of you is the phrase that I've bring for us to reflect. What does all of you make you think? If you want to share on the comments, I will have my pleasure to consider those. All of you, for me, can be addressed from very different angles, but the main issue here is this: we are, all of us, very much more than we even have the idea of being, and that's the idea, pardon the redundancy, that is stressed and presented and developed in many, many branches of human development, whatever those may be, including scientific branches. Because if we think in science, just for starts, if we think of the idea of the junk DNA that some scientists considered as pretty much solid and valid years ago, that very same idea is being dismissed right now because scientists are coming to the conclusion that junk DNA, there is no such thing as junk DNA. The thing is that we still don't understand what is the content, the code, and the information present onto that source of our beingness as humans, which is DNA, and as such they don't understand it, and at the same time they now are getting the grasp of the thing that is, we can't dismiss what we don't understand. We can't call junk to something we don't understand. And that's the same into very practical terms with us human. Why do we tend to dismiss ideas that we don't understand? And why do we tend to dismiss behaviors and emotions or feelings or worldviews that we don't understand? In fact, that tendency was sort of projected onto that very scientific consideration that our DNA has junk in it. in the code, in the base code of it. And now they have changed their minds, yes, and they believe that our DNA, the contents, the residual that we don't understand and that we once called junk, in fact, really can be the source of incredible powers, so to speak, or even function, evolutionary type of ground for us humans to unleash in having certain conditions and context met. So, if we have certain type of conditions, if we have certain type of environments, of considerations, thought processes, maybe feelings. In fact, the science, the conventional science doesn't know, but they make the hypothesis that those proper conditions, evolutionary and so much as from the personal development point of view, they can arise in us the expression of different ways of being that to this present moment are not yet met. So that's the thing. And if we think about agent science, if we think about some deeds of wonder, so to speak, which some people call miracles in that sense, about or arising from some yogis on India, some advanced practitioners of the arts and science of yoga, which in fact is a science of human development. They can do some pretty strange stuff, like keeping their body temperature at very strange levels, low and high, like having some some feats of resistance, of meditation, of going without food and water, of traveling long distances in very short amount of time, and so on and so on and so on, what is called as siddhis. And those siddhis, if we consider the perspective of the current science, why can they be some sort of unleashment of those hidden abilities in our DNA that provided some conditions, some practices, and of course some repeated evocation and call forth of them, they arise. And so as such, we have an idea of what we are and of what we can be, do, or have, that in an immensely range of consideration is due to revision. Not for saying completely wrong in many cases. Yes, we consider ourselves incapable of many things that indeed we can be capable, provided we access the context, the tools, the practices, the knowledge, the disposition for sure, the environment, the relationships, all sorts of resources, activities, and ways of being and interacting with our own selves and the world that can sustain our own path. In that sense of updating our own internal perspective. And of course, but that that also brings us a challenge in my perspective in today times. And that's the challenge of what type of progression, development progression, are we expecting or are we considering? Do we still cling to the idea of perpetual and linear growth? Or do we have a different sort of relationship towards the concept of growth? Just to bring an example. Because in my own perspective, if growth is not ecological in the utmost profound sense of the word ecological, which is sustainable, in sync with the natural rhythms of life as such, not only thinking about green type of ideas, but putting those into broader context and considering that ecology really is the ability to sustain in a evolved relationship with all that is. And in fact, that brings us the ability to more than force our own presence onto our environment, to get in sync, to get in a dance, a productive, even lovely dance with all that surrounds us in broader terms. And so, as such, of course, the most direct way of putting this idea that I've somewhat developed right now is considering that our own growth should be subject to cycles, yes, like all in nature and like all that surrounds us, that our own potential for growth is subject to cycles, that those cycles are not in linear progression, that there are some sort of retrogradations, to use a concept from other branches of knowledge, ancient branches of knowledge. In this case, this concept is very used in astrology. Retrogradation, and at this time that we are right now, there are several planets in making, from the point of view of the earthly observer, making retrogradations. So it is quite in sync with this. The idea is that, in very popular terms, that we must take one step back in order to give 2 or 3 or more steps forward. That's the idea onto the retrogradation, cyclical type of perspective onto the development. Which means that we don't feel as a personal defeat every time we can't go and express that very idea of potential that we have in our heads, because we understand, we acknowledge, and we accept the possibility that that very necessity of giving a step back in really is a natural necessity. So we really need to give some steps back sometimes in order to give much others forward, and that there is no linear growth in any dimension of nature. Only in our heads, in our illuministic, materialistic science type of thinking, that we considered once upon a time that we can grow without limits on a finite on environment, which by definition we have here on Earth. Although it is with never-ending cycles, at least at the human perspective, it really is a finite environment. So we can't expect infinite stupidity, infinite plunging of resources, infinite polluting, infinite destruction of infinite vampire ways of being into this planet without having consequences, of course. And that very same idea should have our own consideration. Yes. And so that's the paradox that we can consider treating this all of you idea, or of you invitation for us to think about what can be the fullest the fullness expression of ourselves. In one hand, we have the idea of we have hidden powers, abilities that are waiting to jump right out of us when the time is right, when the ingredients are in, when the conditions are set, when the moment is right. If we just keep going towards our best repeatedly, deliberately, every single day, or at least more days doing so, that other way around, that's one. And then we have the other perspective that, of course, but we shouldn't go that straight ahead like a flashing light all the time, because that's unsustainable. That's not how life works. We need to have our own dance, yin and yang, to put it in the most simple terms, which are incredibly useful. So we must make the dance of yin and yang with life. Go forth, go back, and revising our own ideas, putting those into practice, and ever more making this in a sense of understanding, in acceptance, in making peace with what is. And that's another paradox, apparently, for many people. How can I develop myself and being fully at peace with myself? How can I keep growing to the very best of my ability to do so, fulfilling my potential, and at the same time being completely at peace, accepting my sense of surrender, and whatever? Well, being very, very keen onto attention, onto noticing the present as it is, stopping the madness of projecting continually onto the future, or remorsing onto the past, living really to the best of our ability right here and right now, and living the dance of life, which is a dance of simply being and striving for ever more abilities of doing so, trying to unleash the other levels that can be a great blessing into our lives, and at the same time accepting the very same level that we are at the time, without making cognitive interventions, unless they had a purposeful, creative application and meaning. Yes. And so I like to think about the ideas of two figures, if you like. I like to think the figure of the torus, like a movement from the inside out that we can. I don't know if you know the figure of the torus. Some of you that are watching may know, like you, Julieta, you may know the figure of the torus. I've already talked about it. It's like a section of an apple. If you cut it at the middle, you can see the torus format. The shape of the apple is like is the torus, and you see at the center like the seeds of the apple, and you can think of the torus as a universal pattern of energy expression of every single unity of being in existence. You can see it in a cell, you can see it in an apple, you can see it in the human force fields, you can see it in the planet Earth force fields, you can see it in galaxies, you can see it all around the universe. And that's one idea. The idea of beingness in and outer expressions and relations with all there is, because those outer expressions and fluxes, they go towards the outer realms, at least in the sensory perception type of consideration, and then from the outer realms they bring inside of us the harvest of experience that we may have, making those very same natural movements of our own expression. And that's one. The other is the ellipse, the elliptical type of movement of our own being, because all in life has a movement in relation to the environment, in relation with the universe. And so in elliptical movement, like like planets, like stars, like even galaxies, in that sort of elliptical movement, we progress naturally, considering two foci, or two centers or operation, if you consider an ellipse. And in one center, and in metaphorical terms, of course, in one center we can sense our own beingness, the torus type of perspective that I've told first. And secondly, we can consider the all there is appeal type of movement. And I know this is very transcendent for some, but that's the way it is, which is the pull, the universal pull that exists in all parts of the universe and that are connected with the own cyclical rhythm of the universe, like expressed in Hinduism or like expressed in Theosophy and other branches of ancient spiritual science. The universe operates really like a yin and yang, and it breathes in and breathes out, yes, into an incredible dilated span of what we call time, which can amount to millions and millions of years, yes, that make ages and ages that are, in fact, are studied and are mentioned in those type of knowledge that I've mentioned, and that they create a specific type of pull into every life forms that exists in the universe. Yes. And so we have the dance of expressing ourselves to the utmost of our ability, to the very best of our capacity by one time, and getting in sync with the evolutionary pull of the universe. Yes, with the breathing of the universe. And that's one of the reasons why the breathing is considered so sacred and so precious onto many not for saying all spiritual traditions, because our breathing, our pneuma, which means spirit in Greek, like we've called, really means the connection we have with the rhythms of the universe. And in fact, it's pure practicality. What happened if we stop breathing? What happened if we stop breathing too much time? Stop breathing and tell me what happened 10 minutes after it. Of course, I'm just kidding, but the idea is we are connecting by the breath to all that is. And in that sense, in that very specific sense, by the breath we connect with the cycles of the universe. And not just by the breath, but the breath is a universal expression and very objective expression, very practical expression, and very subject to real consideration. And yes, rest in peace, you say, Julieta. Those were your words, not mine, but yes, of course. Really rest in peace, total utmost peace. Also known, aka death. Yes. So, my dear friends, please consider that being all of you, it's like really a dance into challenging your own preconceptions of what you are as a person, of your own identity. What you think you are, you will be. You will translate it into practice. And as we know, and Aristotle said it, and many others, we are what we repeatedly do. And as such, we are really animals of habit and products of habit. As such, please get into the habit of challenging your own preconceptions, your own notions, of challenging you intellectually, conceptually, physically, including, yes, and accepting those as gifts from life. And if you can do so, considering the very best practices of the human development that I have already mentioned and are common ground into every library, personal development courses, teachers, traditions, whatever, like attention to breath, vital energy, looking without thinking onto the mindfulness type of practice, and then putting forth our very best expressions, going towards the very best possible contexts, people, accepting when that is not possible, at least to do our own cognitive perception, dealing with what is, no matter how good or how bad, dealing with it, really, to the very best of your ability in every single term. And for finishing our life today, considering that being all of us, being all of you, really amounts, in very simple terms, in this, putting, like Fernando Pessoa said, the great Portuguese poet, astrologer, thinker, and genius, putting every single ounce of you cell that you have in your body, putting every single piece of you onto anything that you do, to the very best of your ability, to the very best of your ability of doing so. Because if you do so, yes, you will be all that you can be. And if you try to do so, because it is an ideal, but really isn't a thing of trying, if we live in the now, and if we live in the intuition, and for those of you that already have the practice of searching and of igniting that, more than searching, igniting that presence, ever more, you know that when we make something with totality, when we are all in doing one thing, and at the same time we have that ignition of presence, wonderful things happen, and we are fully onto the very best we can be. So, my dear friends, thank you so much for watching. Please send me a message if you like here on the platform, or an email for Julio at juliobarroco.com. Please make your very best effort. Without effort, consider this last paradox, in order for your being of destination that you are, come forth to the benefit of us all. So, thank you very much for watching. Tomorrow we will have other more stuff to talk, of course. And the title of the tomorrow's revision will be Your Inch. And your inch is like the sister of this transmission. And your inch simply amounts to the idea of, okay, Julie, but what difference does it make? I'm just one little tiny spot onto this big planet, having so much challenges going on at this time. We see it is in the COVID situation, what we are going to do. Are we challenging the information, not challenging, doing what they want us to do, not doing what they want us to do? Do what you are. That's the answering, and not answering for many, yes, but really is the only answer that is possible. And tomorrow we will talk about that other perspective, your inch perspective. So, thank you very much. We'll see you tomorrow again. Bye bye.